All in Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Tuesday, October 29th, and this is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns, brought to you by Rogue Sports Network. I'm Tanner Carlson along with Jake Jimerson. In today's jam-packed episode, you're going to want to stay tuned. We give our final thoughts on the Texas Vandy game. We're going to close that chapter heading into the bye week. We're going to touch a little bit on what Sark was talking about in his presser on Monday afternoon. And then we're going to end the show with some Longhorns in the NFL, a little bit of a lighter note. This show, I feel like, has been a little heavy really since the Oklahoma week. Going into Oklahoma, it was all intense. Going into Georgia, still intense. Going into Vandy, coming off the loss, and then now reacting to the Vanderbilt game. This show has felt a little heavy. We need a little bit of lighter air in the air. So we're going to talk a little bit Longhorns in the NFL right now and just go down memory lane a little bit of some better times, some good times. I don't know about better times, but good times with some of these players. And so it should be a very fun show. We're going to break down really what our final thoughts segment is going to be. You might want to take some notes. You might want to jot down some stuff. We have a lot of numbers we're going to throw at you. We're going to try to break it down as elementary as we possibly can. And it's primarily going to be coming on the penalties that were taken away, the yardage that were earned, the potentially earned yardage on those plays that the penalties negated. And we're going to add that up of how many yards Texas squandered when it came to committing those penalties and how many points it cost Texas and how many points it gave Vanderbilt in return, both offensively and defensively. If that makes sense, you'll catch on. It's really not that overly complicated. But Jake, how are you doing today? A couple days removed from Saturday's game, headed into the bye week. We've had a chance to kind of reflect, compose ourselves a little bit following the game. Any final thoughts that you want to get off your chest before we get into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to dive into a lot of my final thoughts here with the numbers that we're going to bring up and stuff. But kind of my thoughts heading into the bye are this is not only good for the team, it's good for the fan base. I think the whole fan base, you and I included, need to take a little collective deep breath. You know, that I've seen a lot of melting down despite being 7-1 heading into the bye week, which I think we all kind of predicted or would have been perfectly fine with heading into the season. You know, I think we both picked them to lose to Georgia. And so I think the season has unfolded nicely for the Longhorns and really with only one close win this entire season, which we just saw. I feel really good heading into this bye week. And after kind of being able to take a step back and calm down after winning a little bit too close of a game on Saturday, I'm like, okay, they get a bye week. They're going to get healthier. They got time to prepare for Florida. You know, they should win these next 3 games fairly easily, hopefully a little easier in the Vanderbilt game, and then head into A&M for a big one. And so I just kind of feel relieved almost. It's like, okay, bye week's here. We can take a deep breath for a week. These last 3 weeks, as you mentioned, have been very intense.
Well, the way that Vanderbilt season was going, Jake, we kind of didn't really know Vanderbilt was going to be that, but really following the Alabama game, that's immediately when I think every Texas fan's switch kind of turned on to Vanderbilt and said, man, is this the toughest 3-game stretch of Texas' season? Oklahoma, Georgia, Vandy. That was before we knew what Oklahoma was ultimately going to be. Oklahoma sucks this year. Let's just call it what it is. They're not a very, formidable opponent. However, their defense still has talent. Their coaching staff, defensive minded. Their offense is just complete trash. Georgia, on the other hand, we knew that they were getting healthy. That was always going to be a game. That was never marked in as an automatic win on any Texas fans. I think the consensus I remember in the offseason was Texas is probably even likely going to lose 1 game. That's where we stand right now. We are exactly where we kind of thought we would be at this point in the season. Now, Vandy gave us a better game than what maybe we thought going into SEC play was going to be, but they're also a better team than the entire country thought they were going to be. So I think it's
with a really good quarterback.
With a very good quarterback and a great coaching staff that coaching staff plays to the team's strengths. No matter how little those strengths are or how big their weaknesses are, they minimize their weaknesses and they maximize their strengths on Vanderbilt. And that's exactly what they did against Texas. So, Jake, let's go ahead, dig into our final thoughts of that game. And really, I want to throw some numbers at everybody. All right. And basically, if you haven't watched our immediate reaction show, I think now would be a great time to pause this video and go back and watch that video and then come back, because a lot of what our final initial reaction was Texas shot themselves in the foot, whether that be through penalties or turnovers, or not capitalizing on the turnovers that the defense rewarded to the offense. And I think that was kind of the overall consensus. And final thoughts, Jake, I kind of feel the exact same way. To be honest, it didn't really change from Saturday to today.
No, if anything, I feel even more strongly about that. On my second watch through and on my third watch through, I was like, wow, Texas kind of dominated this game. The defense dominated Vanderbilt's offense. I mean, they had less than 200 yards of offense until that final drive, where they went down and scored a touchdown, which Texas shot themselves in the foot on that drive too, by the way, and should have had a pick six. And this game shouldn't have even looked as close as the final score did, because the final score didn't reflect how close it was. Vanderbilt never really had a chance to take a lead after their 7-0 lead they had to start the game. And so after watching it, I really felt like, wow, yeah, Texas dominated this game. And it was why when I was originally watching the game, I really never felt nervous, other than that one point when, it got cut to 7, but then, Vanderbilt didn't get good field position. I trusted the defense, so I never got overly nervous. But at the end of the day, a 3-point win was like, okay, they're going to have to get playing better. But then after watching again, it's like they didn't really play bad. They just got to eliminate really penalties, because the 2 turnovers you and I were discussing before the show, and Sarkisian discussing his presser, were a little weird. I don't think we're going to see tipped passes like that be picked that often the rest of the season, or at least I hope not, because those were, especially the first one was pretty unlucky. That actually would have been more than likely a complete ball for a lot of yardage.
Okay, Jake, let's go ahead and get into the penalty breakdown. This is from I got a credit on X, Nash Talks Texas. If you don't follow Nash Talks Texas, give him a follow. He's a great follow. He typically posts the full game following on X, and then he'll also post certain things and aspects about the game. This instance, all penalties committed by Texas, which was a big conversation on the internet. And so shout out Nash Talks Texas. Appreciate everything that you're doing there to help us out on our show. So on the offense, the game started with an opening kickoff holding by Warren Robertson. Again, same guy who committed 2 holding penalties against Georgia on special teams. That put Texas inside their own 10 yards. Texas really only got that return out to about the 15, so that cost Texas 5 yards total, because they started at their 10, moved it half the distance to the goal line. So lost about 5 yards there. Then on essentially, I believe it was later, midway through the first quarter, an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty in which they didn't show the replay on the broadcast. Thank you, SEC Network, for being trash. Cam Williams had a 15-yard penalty. This was a legit penalty, by the way. I also determined whether or not on a second, third, fourth watch through on if these penalties were legitimate, if they were phantom calls, or if they were a little bit on the iffy side. This was legit. Cam Williams basically got his guy down on the ground, followed through with a little right hook to the chest, neck area. Again, that was a 9-yard carry on 1st and 10 to get Texas into field goal range. That 15-yard penalty took away a total of 24 yards of what would have been a potentially earned yardage from the run. And then again, in the first half, a holding penalty on that same drive from Kelvin Banks. This was a 10-yard penalty. This was a phantom call. There was no holding penalty. Again, Kelvin Banks, you can basically put 90% of that going towards phantom calls, but takes away a 13-yard first down run that got Texas inside the Vandy 20. That backs them up instead back to around the 40-yard line. That takes back a 23-yard potentially earned play. And so that was a 23-yard swing there. And those were just the first half penalties. Again,
I think they ended up punting that drive too, by the way.
And taking away points off the board for Texas, getting them out of field goal range because of those 2 penalties, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, it took away a minimum of 3 points, if not 7, with the way they were. It felt like every time the run game got going, there was a penalty call.
Right. And so that was the first half penalties. Let's go ahead on the defensive side of the ball in terms of penalties. There was a holding penalty right at the end of half. It was called on Muhammad. The penalty was really against Michael Taft. It was a 10-yard penalty for defensive holding that got Vanderbilt into field goal range. They were about at the 47-yard line, would have made it a 50, maybe almost a 60-yard field goal if the penalty wasn't committed. It was iffy. It was a very, that one's one of those 50-50 ones. If it doesn't happen in open field and it happens within the linebacking and kind of over the middle of the field, it probably doesn't get called. It was just because it was an open field. Anyway, that adds 10 yards from Vandy's 47-yard line. That put them in field goal range right before half with 19 seconds left. They end up getting the points from that. So that was kind of the first half points. Again, you probably took at least 3 points off the board for Texas in that first half, and then you probably gave Vandy another 3 points. That was a 6-point swing just from penalties in that first half.
At minimum as well, because Texas was rolling on that drive. Right. I think they would have scored a touchdown if they didn't commit any more penalties or phantom calls. And so you look at that and you're like, that's not too many penalties. Well, they were up 21-7 or 21-10 at half. And so if, you could have been looking at a 28-10 or 28-7 type first half. I'm happy with the 21-10 lead at half. I was very happy at halftime of the game. So, less penalties, they were up by more, and then we're going to see how that kind of changes in the second half with the game ended up being a little bit tighter.
So you'll see on your crawler here, this is the final result of the final game. However, second half penalties is really what did it for Texas. A false start by Cam Williams makes it, it was on 1st and 10 at the 50-yard line, makes it 1st and 15. It was a legit penalty. It's false start. It happens. And then later on in about I want to say late third quarter, there was a holding penalty on Amari Niblack, 10-yard penalty on a 3rd and 1 conversion. That puts Texas back at about 3rd and 10. Doesn't convert that third down play. That goes from Vandy's 45 to about the Texas 45-ish range. And then again, that was a 9-yard gain that was negated. That's a 20-yard swing for the Texas Longhorns after converting a 3rd and 1. So that already would put Texas probably in field goal range at the very least. They end up not getting that conversion. They have to punt, and then that goes to Vandy's offense in the second half. Again, another holding penalty by Kelvin Banks. This one was a little bit iffy. This kind of started early in the drive, and Texas actually was pushed back to a 3rd and 20, and that was actually Quinn Ewers' best play of the game that he converted to Silas Bolden. So this one didn't really take away any points on the board. However, Kelvin Banks got called for a 10-yard penalty on first down, negated a 3-yard run, set Texas up from their 27 inside their own 20. That was a 13-yard swing. And then the holding penalty on Gunnar Helm at the very end of the game to basically ice the game, essentially a 10-yard penalty. Again, a phantom call. It was a perfectly fine block by Gunnar Helm. That negated a 7-yard run on 1st and 10. That would have made it 2nd and 3. However, and you got it inside Vanderbilt's 30-yard line, push it back 10 yards. That negates 17 yards. So total on the entire game, Jake, the offensive penalties cost Texas 96 offensive yards of potentially earned yards and negated 3 earned first downs. I mean, that's huge at the end of the game, especially in the second half.
Well, yeah, and especially where a lot of them were 3rd down conversions, and you go from converting a 3rd and short, 3rd and medium to trying to convert a 3rd and long, and I don't care who you're playing against. It's difficult. You're not going to convert 3rd and 10 very often. 3rd and 8 plus, really 3rd and 7 plus is just not an area you want to be in. You really want to be in 3rd and 5 and shorter, and those are where it's really manageable. And that was what ate them up. And the other side of this also is against a team like Vandy that runs and manages the game that the way they do, you're not going to get as many possessions. So when you kill yourself on possessions with these penalties that not only cost you points, but just cost you being able to extend the drive, it is even more painful against a team like Vandy where you're getting maybe half of the possessions that you normally would in a game. And you definitely felt that in this game. Cause I remember when the first quarter ended, I was like, holy crap, that was the fastest first quarter I've watched in like 10 years.
Yeah.
And so that was the other thing I really noticed on my second watch through is like, wow, yeah, Vandy does a good job of limiting possessions in a game, even in a game where they didn't necessarily control the clock.
And this is a big one, Jake. Defensive penalties. There were not nearly as many. There were 7 offensive penalties. There were 3 defensive penalties, but the 3 defensive penalties really hurt Texas. There was a defensive pass interference against Muhammad in the second half, 15-yard penalty. It was a legit penalty. Earlier in the first half, if they called the same exact penalty, hand fighting between Ryan Wingo and the Vandy cornerback in the first half, that was on 4th and 7. It was an incomplete pass on Vandy's 35-yard line. Texas' offense would have taken over. Vanderbilt ends up scoring a touchdown later on that drive. Again, that was the play, if you remember, and anyone who was watching the game, Quinn Ewers had 17 straight completions, goes to Ryan Wingo on a deep ball. It falls incomplete. There's no flag or anything, but there was an obvious grab around the shoulder pad, neck area on Wingo, but Wingo also a little bit of hand checking as well. There was no penalty. I was like, okay, if you're not going to call it, you're not going to call it. Essentially, the exact same thing happened on 4th and 7 for Vanderbilt, but it was called on Muhammad, gave him a first down. Vanderbilt actually ends up scoring a touchdown out of that too.
Yeah, I would argue what Muhammad did, by the way, was even less than, because Wingo didn't do very much. He had a guy around his neck. Muhammad and the receiver were truly 50-50 fighting.
Yeah.
And so I really hated that call when you let that go in the first half.
And then obviously the one that was known, it was very legit, but a targeting penalty by Vernon Broughton that took away the pick 6 scored by Kobe Black. Vandy actually ended up scoring a touchdown on that drive, made the game look much closer than what it was. That was a legit penalty. I don't know what Vernon Broughton was doing. However, defensive penalties, they give up about 40 yards to Vandy's offense. Vandy scores 17 points on those penalties committed by Texas. So every single penalty that Texas committed on defense, Vandy actually, it extended Vandy's drive enough to where they actually scored points out of those penalties. Now, that won't happen all the time. That's not a forever thing. But again, it just kind of goes to show that's what the flow of the game was. That's what happened. That's the cause and effect of making silly mistakes, especially like Vernon Broughton's mistake. It kind of like, some of those holding penalties or false starts where it just pushes you back, especially on the money downs. The Amari Niblack holding, that's egregious. That's obvious. It's an open field. And really, Trey Wisner probably gets the first down. He maybe doesn't get 9 yards, but he at least gets the first down and extends the drive.
Yeah. And it's the difference between a 27-24. This wasn't even though it ended up being closer, it was really a 10-point game. I wasn't worried about Vandy winning even after they scored that late touchdown, but it's the difference between a 27-24 game and a 41-10 game. Because that's around where the score probably should have ended.
All right, Jake, a few notes on Sark's presser. He did talk about those penalties. We're not going to get into that too much. On the turnover side of things, he did say that the game was just kind of funky. The 2 tip passes from Ewers was strange. The second one, not as strange. That's probably more so on Quinn. Now, Sark didn't go out right and just say that, but he did say the first one was that's just unlucky for it to be deflected the way it was, for it to hang in the air the way it did, and for it to be picked off. But he did say overall, he thought Quinn Ewers, he said, I thought Quinn played tremendously against Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I would agree with that overall. He hit a deep ball. For as much as, we had talked about, you need to hit a deep ball. He hit some intermediate passes. And then that 3rd down and 20 conversion, that's big time stuff. I mean, that was stepping up in the pocket, finding an open man downfield, hitting it. His on 2nd and 3rd watch, his footwork, you could see, just go back and watch the Georgia game, watch this game. It's 2 different QBs again. Still not quite to Michigan level, Quinn, but definitely a step in the right direction. And you feel like it definitely was an injury related thing. Obviously, Georgia was creating more pressure, though there was a lot of pressure in this game. The offensive line did not have a great game. I would argue they played worse in this game against Georgia when you consider the talent comparison. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I thought, Quinn had a B+ A- type game if I were to grade it.
All right, Jake, you wanted to talk a little bit about this as well, and it's been something that's been on your mind. Quinn Ewers ranks dead last on average depth per target. That's 5.9 yards in the Power 4 teams. I know they say Power 5. There's Power 4 conference. Out of 79 quarterbacks, he ranks 79th on his average depth per target, just under 6 yards per attempt.
Yeah, and I've seen some fans saying in response to this, well, it's the design of Steve Sarkisian's offense, and that's just not true. We saw Arch Manning come in, and this is not me saying Arch Manning should start. I just want to be clear about that. We have said Quinn is QB1. The only time we've ever questioned it was saying he needed to play better against Vandy. He did. He is QB1, but his inability to stretch the field consistently with deep passing, which has been a problem his whole career, does hinder this offense to a point. The offense can still play at a very high level, but the deep shots aren't there. There were several underthrown deep shots against Vanderbilt as well. And the only bright side of that, sometimes you get a pass interference call. I sent you this chart earlier today, but there's an on target rate. So this isn't necessarily completion rate. It's an on target rate by depth, by passing depth. And it listed, 12 of the most notable QBs in the country. And Quinn Ewers in 31 plus yards is the only one who has 0%, only 4 attempts. He also has by far the least amount of attempts, but a 0% accuracy rate at that 31 and above yards, and a pretty low, especially compared to everyone else, 50% rate on that 21 to 30. But again, only 8 attempts. So only 12 attempts, 21 yards or more. I think Arch Manning probably had more. Now, granted, some of that was him just slinging it to sling it
for no reason.
He probably had more attempts in his limited play this year. And that is I just want to say this to make the point. Quinn's QB1, but also this isn't the full Sarkisian offense still, because they aren't able to stretch the field with Quinn. And that is a Quinn related issue. That is not a Sark issue.
Right. And the point of these short passes, quick out routes, dump off passes out in the flats, quick screens, these bubble screens that Sark likes to run, is to force that defense up, to press the corners and to get those safeties to creep up. So then you can go over the top and you can hit a big play. That's what we saw. A lot of that last year at Alabama was a huge part of the reason why Texas won that game. A couple shots to Adonai Mitchell, a couple shots to Xavier Worthy. Those big shots kept the defense honest and back, so then you can establish the run game. Same thing in Michigan. We saw it this year against Michigan. Isaiah Bond down the seam on the opening drive. That immediately forced Michigan to kind of push their coverage back a little bit, and that opens up run lanes. Well, if you don't have that deep ball threat and you can consistently can push up a little bit and put more pressure on the offensive line and just at the line of scrimmage in general, then you're going to have tighter run lanes. Your gaps aren't going to be as sound. The blitz pickups are going to be a little bit more pressured and a little bit quicker to get into the quarterback's lap. It all kind of mingles and ties in together. And so if you're able to just hit 1, 2 of those balls every now and then, it just shows the defense, at least in film, that you're able to do that. And Sark did touch on that in his press conference. He also touched on turnovers, Jake. He complimented the defense. He called out Michael Taft. He also called out Jelani McDonald in their performances, both definitely worthy of it. I just want to mention just real quickly, does Michael Taft give off future head coach vibes? And maybe not for the University of Texas, but he just gives off head coach vibes. Every time he talks in the media, I'm like, that's the right answer. He gets it. He just gets it.
I mean, everything about him gives off head coach vibes. He's a walk-on player who's now worked his butt off so hard. He's not only a starter, he's been excellent this year. He was a good player last year, a serviceable player last year. He has been a very good to excellent starter this year for the Longhorns on a consistent basis. I mean, I can't think of a game this year where I've thought, wow, Michael Taft had a weak game. He's all over the field tackling. He's always playing 100%. He's been sound in coverage. He's a leader on the team. And he's a guy who the Longhorns, we're going to miss next year. And I think a lot of fans, Michael Taft sometimes was targeted last year a little bit by the fan base, just because when he made a bad play, it stuck out. He's the walk-on. He's the white boy in the secondary at the end of the day.
Let's just say it the way it is. Let's just say it the way it is. You see a white dude out in the open field get burned, you're going to call him out on it, period.
Oh yeah. But this year he's been getting a lot of love. He's been getting his roses from Longhorn Nation, and he deserves it. And he's going to be someone that is probably going to get a chance to play on an NFL team, especially from a special team standpoint. This
Hey,
is that's the
if
exact
Cooper
type of
DeJean can
guy.
do it, if Cooper DeJean can do it, my jingle jangled Michael Taft can do it. But yeah, he did talk about the four turnovers forced in this game. He counted the Kobe Black interception, by the way. There was only 3 legitimate turnovers forced against an offense that had only turned the ball over twice all season long. Now, he did say that the offense 6 turnovers in 2 games. That needs to be corrected, obviously, along with the penalties as well. So, Jake, let's go ahead, spend the rest of our time, unless you have anything else you want to add to that. Let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about Texas Longhorns and where they are now. In the NFL, this is a really fun topic. We just are probably going to end up just this segment will probably turn into dudes naming guys at the end of the day, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Just a couple quick little stats for everybody. There are currently 31 former Texas Longhorns on NFL rosters now. 21 NFL teams claim a Texas player, 19 defensive players in the league, 17 offensive players in the league, and 3 special teamers. There's the number 1 position that is in the league right now, drafted by the NFL from Texas, is the defensive line. Surprisingly enough, DLU is that what they're calling Texas nowadays? Also 7 defensive backs, 6 wide receivers, 5 running backs, 3 linebackers, 3 offensive linemen, 2 kickers, 1 quarterback, that would be Sam Ellinger, 1 tight end, that's JT Sanders, the fullback, Andrew Beck, and the punter, Michael Dixon, for the Seattle Seahawks.
And a partridge and a pear tree.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, my man. But yeah, dude, name some. I mean, you can go down the list. You got Bijan, you got Overshown at Dallas, you got Tavondre Sweat, a couple of guys making big impacts for their teams right now. Of recent Longhorn teams too.
Yeah, I mean, we're both Cowboys fans, unfortunately, but Overshown's been one of the biggest bright spots to watch this year. He has. It was a big bummer him. He looked so good last year in preseason and then tore his ACL. So it's been awesome to see him come back from an injury that's really hard to come back and still show that explosiveness. And then kind of on the Cowboys subject, the only thing I look forward to watching next week with the Cowboys is watching Bijan probably go for 200 plus yards against them. Yeah. Because no one on the Cowboys is going to tackle him other than maybe Overshown.
And that's going to be a lot of fun to see. I can't wait to see Overshown try to take down Bijan. Now, Jake, you and I, we can get on this Cowboy rant. I'm not going to, just for the sake of this show.
It's not worth it.
They're not worth the airtime for sure. We are unfortunately diehard Cowboys fans as well, but we are definitely not on the bandwagon this year. But definitely looking forward to watching Bijan play against Dallas, and I hope he does have a big game. Selfishly, Tavondre Sweat, Jake, I love him and Brian Baldingers. If anybody follows Brian Baldinger or doesn't follow him, give him a follow. He does great Baldy breakdowns, and he is in love with who he calls Meatloaf this year, or no, he calls him T-Pain. Tavondre Sweat said, my nickname is Meatloaf, but Baldy has just completely ignored the nickname and just calls him T-Pain. But dude, I did not know this. Sweat leads his team, the Tennessee Titans, who's one of the worst teams in the league, granted, but he leads the entire defensive line at the defensive tackle position with 21 total tackles and 2 tackles for loss.
He's been one of the best rookies in the NFL this year. He's a game wrecker. Yeah. And I'll never understand why
he should have been first round.
And some people go, well, some of the off field. Well, he ended up going about where he was mocked, maybe a little bit further back because of that off the field incident, which for me, for any Longhorn fans, it just wasn't a concern. You knew the character of Tavondre Sweat. You knew it was just one of those stupid mistakes that he was going to learn from and not make again. And, you talk about a Dallas Cowboys. I think we both wished that we both wanted them to take him. And now we both he'd be the best defensive lineman on that team by far. And he's got a bright future in the NFL. He's been a game wrecker. I mean, consistently, just like he was in college. There has been no drop off for him in play. A couple tackles for loss as well. He hasn't had any sacks, but I've seen him force multiple pressures, and he's not a sack guy. You draft for to run, but he does generate pressure. He doesn't allow the QB to have room to step up in the pocket. He's been awesome this year to watch.
When the
best rookie for the Longhorns this year.
I mean, very likely. And Byron Murphy, another defensive lineman that was drafted ahead of him in this most recent draft, he is playing fairly well for the Seattle Seahawks. He's been getting plenty of playing time. He's got 14 tackles. He's got 2 tackles for loss and half a sack. Now, again, he was more so the sack artist, if you will, interior defensive lineman. Unless you're Aaron Donald, you're not expecting to get a ton of sacks. And so, but Byron Murphy having a good season. Xavier Worthy, he is just lightning in a bottle, and he fits perfectly within that Chiefs offense. And I think also within that Chiefs offense, it takes maybe a year or two to kind of really find your niche. And the fact that he's playing and as impactful and making as big plays as he already is for that team is vital. They've already just been riddled with wide receiver injuries anyway. So it's fun to see him. They're not just using him in the passing game either. They're using him on the running game. I mean, his first touch in the NFL was a reverse touchdown for like 30 yards on Thursday Night Football against the Ravens. So that's great to see too.
Yeah, I mean, he's more of a big play artist this season. I think you'll see his quantity of reps go up in future years, kind of like you mentioned. Just takes a little time. He needs to probably put a little bit of muscle on. He is still very lean out there, but he's been fun to watch. And talk about another receiver performing really well in the pros, Jordan Whittington. I know that's one that I still can't believe that, he was not taken. And once he went to the Rams, you're like, yeah, he's going to do well there. And, and then he was the story of the preseason, and, on a team that has been pretty up and down this year, to say the least. He's been one of their better performing wide receivers, and he's going to have a long career in the NFL as long as he can stay healthy.
Yeah, and it didn't hurt that Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua got injured. That didn't hurt his stock by any means with that team. Another guy, Jake, that we know and love, Roschon Johnson, 32 carries, 95 yards. He's got 4 touchdowns this season for the Chicago Bears. He's put up a good season. Adonai Mitchell still trying to find his place. I think the quarterback play in Indianapolis is kind of affecting his play. Is that fair to say?
When you have a QB, he goes 2-15 and a half. Yeah, I'd say it's quarterback play.
And then checks himself out of the game because he gets tired.
Yeah, we didn't obviously we weren't, doing this show back then, but you and I were both like, why is Anthony Richardson being mocked in the first round? He can't throw the football. He could not throw the football in college. He was fun. He was exciting. He was electric. He could not throw the football accurately. And shocker, when you can't throw the football very accurately, it doesn't translate well to the NFL. Adonai Mitchell would probably be a star. Put him on the Chargers. He'd be probably their best wide receiver this year. Instead, he's on a QB with a quarterback that is truly a running back playing quarterback, because he cannot throw it. It looks like Matthew Golden trying to throw a pass back there.
Oh, so speaking of, we're huge draft nerds, by the way, ladies and gentlemen. So when this show gets to the point in the season where it's college basketball is in the thick of it, and then you get March Madness is over, and then we're getting into April for the NFL draft. This show is going to be just as active as it is right now. Like, we're going to give full draft breakdowns, college football stuff. So we're really looking forward to that part of the season as well. But then obviously, Jake, I don't think you can talk about Texas Longhorn greats in the NFL without mentioning the GOAT, Justin Tucker, future Hall of Famer, possibly going to go down as the greatest kicker of all time, along with Adam Vinatieri. Now, if Justin Tucker had half as many Super Bowls as Adam Vinatieri, I think he'd be considered the GOAT. Just Vinatieri had bigger moments in his career. Now, I will say Tucker probably showing the first signs of life that he doesn't have the leg that he once had for the first time in his entire career.
Yeah, this year, I don't know exactly what his made to attempt is, but I know he, especially in those 50 plus, 49 plus yard field goals that have been automatic for him for so long, he's been showing signs of being a human. But if you think about it, we talk about how long it's been since, Texas A&M and Texas have played. Well, obviously he's the one who ended that series and sent A&M off to the SEC with an L to hold until this year. And so he's been in the league for a little while. And so hopefully he's able to rebound, but obviously this year's been not quite as good.
Well, Jake, that is going to do it for this show in this episode. That was your final thoughts on the Vandy game. We gave a little bit on Sark Presser, and then we ended the show with a little bit of fun with Longhorns in the NFL and where they are right now. So that's going to do it for Tuesday's episode. Again, we drop these episodes Tuesday through Friday at 12 noon, and then on Saturday, we let the football dictate our show. We will probably watch a couple of the games, maybe before the evening games get started on Saturday. We'll record our episode and try to get it out sometime within where all the college football action is going on. So stay tuned for that. We've got guests coming up. We have a great guest list. Some of them not scheduled, some of them pending, but we do have some on the board and ready to talk with us as we progress through the bye week and into Florida next week. And for your daily fix of all things Texas Longhorns right here on Rogue Sports Network, your daily fix for your Texas Longhorns. I'm Tanner Carlson. That is Jacob Jimerson. Welcome.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.